welcome back on this new episode of our watchmaking road trip adventure, and today we will show you yet another dimension of watchmaking as we're about to walk with you through the full production process of a watch from raw material to the actual final watch. We are still in the region of La Chaux-de-Fonds, but today, and to be more precise, we are in Le Locle, the sister city just next door, and it's also part of the World Heritage Site of the UNESCO for its original urbanism and organization, something mentioned in our previous episode, as well as the fact that this region was home of industrial watchmaking. And today's adventure will perfectly illustrate this. So now we're going to visit something different again. But this is an example of historical manufacture, okay, industrial manufacture. And this house is papa to a very famous caliber that probably all you guys know, the El Primero. So you know where we're going?
Zenith.
Zenith,
Oh, yeah.
Here we go.
High beat.
Today we know Zenith as a brand of its own with its own distinctive products and so forth, but historically speaking, Zenith is what we call a manufacturer, meaning a watch movement manufacturer. Movements that would later be sold to brands, and to make a parallel with cars, you could say that Zenith was the equivalent of an engine supplier, a bit like you used to see Cosworth or Ilmore engines in the world of sports cars. So we were nicely greeted, and before walking through this rather imposing but beautiful industrial site restored just recently, well, we got some explanation on the history of Zenith and its role from the late 19th century till today.
That's 110 years ago. And in 1906 they made this engraving after having finished the last of the 18 buildings. That's the one up here.
From a very small company launched in 1865, Zenith continuously developed its capabilities, optimizing and inventing new production processes. And from one original building, well, rapidly there were 19 with more than 1,000 workers manufacturing up to 500,000 watch movements per year used by different clients. The vision here is that everything was integrated, but coming back very rapidly on this, the brand element of watchmaking represents in a certain way the tip of the iceberg. And this was even more so in the past, as a watch represents and symbolizes the end result of a multitude of different operations performed by a network of complementary competencies. It is only recently that we've seen brands internalize more and more some of these various steps of the overall production process. And that's what Zenith did a long time ago. Anyhow, it was now time to follow the guide and discover the full production path. But to get better in the Zenith mood, we all got to wear one of their watches, a nice little perk for the visit. So off we went, and naturally everything starts with raw material. Plates of metals are stamped in huge, massive presses, then treated, and this will become the base plates onto which many components of the watch's movement will hold onto. It's like the chassis of your car in a certain way. Then all the other components are produced using different techniques, from bridges that help maintain together components of the movements, to gears, pinion, screw, ratchet. Well, all these components are produced internally, and this know-how is the result of years and years of experience, something that precisely sets Zenith apart. Coming back on this industrial dimension, a fine example of this is the fact that most of these minute components are stamped with an incredible level of precision. We are talking microns, and these operations can be repeated over and over again. This may seem simple, but it's something quite special, and lets me come back on an episode of the history of Zenith that illustrates perfectly the crisis mechanical watchmaking went through in the 70s. As a specialized movement manufacturer, Zenith had been working on a movement in the 60s that would revolutionize quite a few things. This was, and still is, the El Primero movement, a high-frequency movement beating at 4 Hz, enabling higher precision and very well suited for chronograph. In fact, this movement was even used by Rolex in the Daytona for quite some years. Well, what I wanted to explain is that during this big quartz crisis, jobs were lost, competencies evaporated, and some of the actual production tool was simply sold for scrap. And this is almost what happened to Zenith. At the time, the owners weren't really watchmakers, and in this troubled business context, well, they didn't believe any longer in this company's future and decided to get some money back by just simply selling some of the machine and other key parts of the factory for scrap value. But one guy disobeyed, okay, not a very Swiss thing to do, and he decided to hide stamping tools that enabled to reproduce all these components of this fantastic watch movement. So all these parts were secretly placed in an attic. The attic was actually sealed, and it's only when things got sorted out with a new ownership, a new direction, that they resurfaced and enabled Zenith to produce back this El Primero movement, a movement that is still being produced today, albeit some further improvements here and there. So this man is now considered as a hero within the company, and for good reasons, and contributes obviously to the legend of this movement.
All these are old stamping tools here. Whatever you see here are old stamping tools of calibers that we do not manufacture anymore.
Some of the presses were incredible, and a demonstration that he gave to use a press to cut a piece of paper no more than 1 centimetre across. Just to look at how it managed to cut with no pressure at all was strange and bizarre, but incredible too. He showed us, the old presses. It was stored away discreetly, it's still there, and it was a wonderful place to go.
Steel components are most of the time the components that have a moving function in the movement, right? Whereas the brass components are most of the time immobile.
Yeah. Okay, but let's get back to our tour, and not all components are stamped. Some are machined with CNCs, some extreme CNCs, or using electro-erosion, and this enables to produce even more complex shaped components with an incredible level of precision, something that really got us going.
Check this out.
So once components have been manufactured and controlled, they will also go through some finishing stages, polishing, angling, and some of it is done by machines and or by hand for the high-end pieces of the brand. All the components are then assembled and the movement is now born. And it needs to be encased, dials and hands need to be set, and again, this will all go through different tests. Testing the chronometry of the watch, but also simple visual tests and naturally water resistance test too.
Another thing they do here with robots is the setting of the rubies.
They have organized and they have employed ingenuity and efficiency and planning to make a very high amount of watches in a very efficient way, using very advanced technologies to produce something which still, at the end of the day, keeps the craft going and keeps people's appreciation for mechanical watchmaking. And you can't expect anyone and everyone to start, getting into watches with, something of an AP or a Patek or a Dufour. That's just ridiculous. But a brand like this keeps people's interest going. It pulls them into it, and then from there they can step up to another brand and another and another.
I leave it as a complete contrast to what Philippe Dufour was doing. So, but I felt the power, of the machines, of these machines that work, and the noises, and they're all working and they're all doing their stuff, and so I felt like maybe it's more precise. Maybe it gives the opportunity to give to people the timepieces they want, because Philippe cannot do that, cannot produce 100,000 pieces a year. It gives it to the people, like an iPhone. It gives it to the people.
You can still maintain the company's DNA, even though we are facilitating some of those steps with high-end technology.
The Swiss industry has to cater for different kinds of consumers. And I think what they're doing is very nice, because they're combining, high-end watchmaking with low-cost production. They were using machines in order to replace the human hand in certain times that the human hand is not needed. But when it comes to assembly, when it comes to testing, they still use the human hand. So basically, they're producing a high-end watch, a watch that is, very well tested, that is very reliant, but they're trying to do it at a lower cost in order to give the consumer a chance to be able to buy a somewhat affordable timepiece.
Having one on your wrist and seeing it work, and then kind of walking around the factory, you begin to understand why people make a fuss about it. You understand why people say, oh, this is really important. And something that I really liked as well is, you know, they obviously do a lot of the open working on the dial, and being able to see it all work and kind of, yeah, like I said, in the environment that it was built. I know I've got a lot of respect for it, to be honest. Yeah.
We continued our tour of the manufacturer at the high complication workshop of Zenith, where they work on some very high-end timepieces, including the spectacular Academy Christophe Colomb, a timepiece whose escapement magically stays in the same position, whatever your position. Something totally unique, and as you can imagine, only a few of these timepieces come out of his atelier every year.
That Christopher Columbus watch was insane, you know. I mean, I touched it and I moved it around, and the way that the cage stays in the horizontal position is just amazing, you know. Even no matter how fast you move that watch, it's just in one position. It's just there as a statement to tell people, okay, we can still do it. If you want it, we can provide it to you, but we're still good and we can still innovate, and it is an innovation by itself.
Too much for me. Too much. This is extraordinary. This, I think, it was a show of force, a show of power of the manufacturer.
I was much more impressed just by seeing the escapement itself apart from the watch than I was seeing the watch itself assembled. It's not something that was for me.
So we finally ended our tour by a presentation of the full collection of Zenith. Again, a bit of a dreamland for us. We had to leave the watches that were lent to us, well, almost, and it was then time for us to leave and get ready for our next visit on this watchmaking road trip. In our next episode, you will discover again something new, something a bit more behind the scenes compared to the many timepieces we've seen so far on this adventure, as we are going to find out how they build the indispensable tools watchmakers use on a daily basis. Think about this. What does it take to manufacture a screwdriver for screws that are less than 1 millimeter wide? So see you soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. All the best.
Run over there, I have something nice to show you here.
$12.59.
That's cool.
Truly hip.
That's pretty cool.